What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. It's a Wednesday.
Here we are again.
It's a Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. You guys, this is going to be a wild case today.
And this is a special case because not only are we giving you the case and the details and all that jazz, but then we are also, Bailey,
we are going to interview a special person. And so today's case is about Pamela Bulik, and we're going to be interviewing a really good friend of hers. Her name is Lynda Drews, and Lynda actually wrote the book about this case, and it's called Run at Destruction, A True Fatal Love Triangle.
Which, what a cool title, right?
Yeah, like totally cool. And so Lynda Drews will come up. I think this is going to be a really neat interview or experience for you guys because we cover the case and you're going to hear Lynda Drews' name. And then on Friday, when the interview with Lynda drops, then you're actually talking to somebody from the story. So it's really neat. But this story happened in her hometown when she was, I think, like after college as a young adult. And she ended up writing this book. And so I would encourage everybody to go out and buy this book. I read the entire book in preparation for this case, and it's like, I don't know, 380 pages or something like that. And 98% of the story is from her book. But I left out a ton of details because there's no way I could put a 400-page book into, or a 300-page book or whatever, into a 1-hour episode.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully she'll be able to fill in some of those gaps during the interview. And it's a lot that Bailey read a book because, yes, she is an avid reader, but not a novel, sit down and read a book. And
I'm an avid audiobook listener.
Yes. And like research journals and stuff like that, like reading in that aspect. But yeah, she said that she thoroughly enjoyed it, actually was able to get through it, kept her attention.
It's an excellent book.
Yeah.
And I just want you guys to know, if this episode sounds better than all the rest, that's because Miss Lynda, I sent her this episode, my typed up version, and sent it to her. And she went to town editing it. And so if it sounds like, wow, this was an excellent case, that's all Lynda Drews. That's not me.
And we might have to hire her. Who knows?
I know. And I walked away being like, God, she probably thinks I'm like the most ignorant dummy country bumpkin, because she would like capitalize things and like change the pluralization and stuff. And I was like, this is just a rough edit, I promise. So so yeah, this case kind of brings it all. Just the kind of typical trigger alert. This is going to cover, there are going to be a lot of themes of suicide in this case. Okay. And just whenever you think you know what happened, it turns like a roller coaster.
I do love some twisty turny pretzel cases.
Yeah. And so this is going to revolve around an individual named Pamela Metzger. That's her maiden name, but her married name was Pamela Bulik. And so we're just going to start with that, and then we're going to run through this. Now, Lynda's book is in a completely different order than I did this episode, and I did that on purpose because I couldn't beat how she did her book. It would have just been a really bad replication. So I was like, the best I can do is just rearrange it, and it might not be as good, but it also hopefully will make it even better for when you read the book.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so we're going to start off with the background of a couple that is going to be central to this story.
Okay.
Robert John Bulik and Pamela Metzger met when they attended college together at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Robert, who I'm going to refer to as Bob throughout the episode, he grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He was an altar boy. He played the trumpet. He was a competitive swimmer and tennis player. Bob was a major in the Marine Reserves, and he was viewed as somewhat of an enigmatic dude. So people were like, he's a little aloof, he's a little withdrawn, he's not necessarily like a super team player. And he was he had one of those kind of lone wolf personalities, right?
Do you know that Lucas's grandmother dated a gentleman as she was in her aging years, and he played the mouth trumpet?
Oh, I mean, good on him.
He would do like an entire like with just his mouth, but he would do it quite often. And people would actually like, I think his name was Bob. And they were like, hey, Bob, do your mouth trumpet piece. And so the trumpet apparently can be played as a actual instrument or with your mouth alone.
Well, then maybe Bob did that too.
He might have.
Yeah. And so Pamela Metzger, whom I will refer to as Pam, she was born and raised in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and was a twirler for Lincoln High School band. Isn't that the cutest?
Well, I wish we still had twirlers. I had this conversation just the other day. Like, we need to bring twirling back.
I always think of Miss Congeniality. Yeah. So Pam had an older brother, Bill, who definitely was the golden child of the family. And kind of a fun fact, Bill, her older brother, was actually a Vietnam prisoner of war for 6 years.
Oh, my.
And so I think it was between like high school and early college that he was a prisoner of war. But he did get out. They started all of these wonderful programs. So it's really amazing. It really kind of puts into perspective how much this family went through. And so Pam, when she met Bob, she was immediately taken. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and athletic. And they were considered, when they started dating, they were considered one of the, quote, big couples on campus.
Oh.
So alongside swimming and playing tennis, Bob was the president of the Letterman's Club and recording secretary for his fraternity. Pam was the manager of the men's swim team. She was a cheerleader. She was on the yearbook staff and was a member of the PIM Club and Recreation Association.
Oh, my.
So they were like the it couple.
Yes. Yeah. Couple goals.
So Bob graduated from college in January of 1970 with a bachelor's in biology and a minor in physical education. And Pam graduated that same year in June with a degree in physical education as well.
Oh, okay.
So by August of 1970, Pam and Bob were married. Their relationship in the early years of their marriage, when Bob was in the Marines, there were a lot of good things about their relationship. Bob and Pam were highly devoted parents, and after Bob was discharged from the Marines, he accepted a teaching job at Green Bay Correctional Institution.
Oh.
Yeah, so he got a job as teaching physical therapy education to the incarcerated individuals there.
Oh, that's a cool gig.
Yeah, and it was reported that he didn't love this job, like he didn't connect with it real well.
Yeah.
But he was described as being super intelligent, hardworking, and was good to his clients, if you will, but that just wasn't the setting for him.
Yeah, for sure.
And his goal was to teach in the Green Bay school system. So that was what he was aspiring to do. And in 1979, that came true. He got a job in the Green Bay school system. And so Pam ended up teaching again, this is by 1979, Pam taught at a high school in Freedom, which was about 20 miles south of Green Bay. She was a special education teacher who focused on emotionally disturbed children. And then Bob ended up working at an inner city school as a special education teacher.
That blows me away because, as we talked about, I think we've talked about in a couple episodes, like we have to remember that in the world we live in now, special education is a thing. You can go to school for it. It's very widely accepted. It's known about. I would bet money that was not the case, that they were really kind of pioneers in their field of study, if you will.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing, especially at that time. And so by 1983, the Buliks had 2 children, Abby, who was 9, and Alex, who was 11. Now, Abby and Alex are not their real names, but since Pam had the name, since Lynda had the names changed in her book to Abby and Alex, I just kept that going and not using their names since they were minors.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And so Pam and Bob were totally devoted parents and appeared to have a pretty close-knit family system. And Bob and Pam spent both of their spare time in a hobby around running. So both of them were avid runners, and they participated in the Wednesday night fun run group with a large group of close friends who were also runners.
Okay, we need to stop because these people are kind of living my dream. Like, I so want to live that life and be an avid runner and be super
A
just
special
gung
education
ho.
teacher.
Yes, but yet, alas, here I am.
Here we are. And so by this point, it's 1983, and Pam and Bob have been married for 13 years.
Mhm.
But on August 18th of that year, things totally started to shift.
We're starting to go belly up.
Yeah. Bob and Pam went downtown to celebrate their 13th wedding anniversary, and then they ended up going back home. When they got home, they drank some wine, cooked some dinner, and prepared to go for a run. And literally, running is the central theme in this whole case, okay? Within moments, Bob said that he was crippled over in pain from being attacked by an unknown person, and Pam was struck in the head, instantly blacking out
In their house?
in their house.
Ugh. Lucas would say that's why you got to shut your garage door. Close your garage door. He would say the reason why this happened is because they didn't close their garage door. Whether or not they did or not, Lucas would blame it on that.
Yeah. When Pam came to, she had a major head wound and was bleeding profusely. So Bob loaded Pam in the car, drove her to the hospital, where she received 10 stitches in her head and was placed in the ICU.
Yikes.
So it was a pretty serious attack.
Yeah.
When Pam stabilized, detectives showed up to interview the couple about this home invasion and attack. Bob shared that what he could recollect from the event is that it was an older teenager, but not the younger ones that he would work with, but an older teenager, kind of younger adult male. And he said that he was struck in the stomach and blacked out. And then this individual must have attacked Pam, hitting her over the head with an object.
Okay.
Early on in their questioning, though, detectives felt that while Pam was in the hospital, Bob hung around a lot in her room.
Yeah.
But not so much like a worried husband concerned about her injuries and her vitals hang around, but more being highly anxious about Pam's recollection and memories of the attack.
So more like, shut the F up. Shh, shut the F up.
Yeah. So after being discharged from the hospital, doctors told Pam that she would have to take medical leave from teaching for several months due to her head injury.
That's a massive head injury. She was concussed. She might have had a contusion.
Yeah. And what struck people really odd about this break was really around Bob's behavior. At some point, he left Pam alone at home shortly after discharging from the hospital so he could compete in a triathlon way across the state. And people were like, that's super weird that your wife just got out of the ICU and out of the hospital and she can't go back to work and you're going to go run in a triathlon.
Yeah, at this point, she's considered to have, I would assume, a TBI, a traumatic brain injury.
Or something.
You know what I mean?
Despite Pam's initial response to investigators that there is no way that Bob could be behind the attack, Pam would later confide in a teaching friend that she felt she had been the victim of a hit, but she still didn't think that Bob had arranged it.
Oh, dude, I would be pissed.
Yeah.
If Lucas put a hit out on me. Oh, not around here, partner. Not around here.
Pam also shared with another teaching colleague that she had inklings that Bob might have been involved in the assault, but Pam wasn't sure. And there were mixed feelings about Bob's involvement in the assault. One of Pam's teaching colleagues always thought Bob was an arrogant, standoffish, rather controlling dude, but not to the point to where she would feel like he was capable of planning and carrying out an attack on his wife.
Right. Kind of one of those, he's a bit of a jerk, but he's harmless, right?
That seems to be the consensus.
A lot of bark, no bite.
Yeah. And so while investigators were looking into this supposed break-in home invasion attack, Bob had reported that some things had been stolen out of their backyard, and there were also prior reports of a peeping Tom in the neighborhood. So there was a lot of validity to this as well. Before the night of the assault, one of the Buliks' neighbors told investigators that they heard voices coming from the woods behind their and the Buliks' home, but they couldn't make out what they were saying, and they didn't really know whose voices they were.
Okay.
And to make it a little bit more weird, in the days and weeks after the break-in and the attack, the Buliks left their house unlocked. And so neighbors were like, that's super weird, because there was a lot of reports that Pam was really paranoid and not safe in her home. So then, like,
Mm,
why would you leave your doors unlocked?
right. Right.
And so eventually, police wanted the couple to take a lie detector test to rule them out in their involvement in the attack. And Pam was like, I got you, fam. And Bob was like, I respectfully decline.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Thanks, but that's a hard pass. And so initially after their attack, and especially Pam's more brutal attack, Bob was super supportive. He was caring and doting towards Pam. But the tides in their relationship quickly started to shift about a month after the attack into mid-September.
Mm-hmm.
Bob started to become critical towards Pam, often rehashing marital problems, like problems that Pam felt like they had already squashed, but he kept bringing them back up. And she was like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And around that same time, in Bob's shift in behaviors towards her, Pam accidentally stumbled upon a receipt in Bob's pants.
Oh, no.
In his pants pocket. And it was a purchase at a local jewelry store.
This is giving me Love Actually vibes. Remember when Emma Thompson's character thought that she was going to
100%.
get that,
Yes.
what was it, a necklace or something? And he got her that Joni Mitchell CD.
Mhm.
Oh, no. Oh, Bob, you got to clean your pants out, dude.
And so the thing is, Pam knew her birthday was coming up, but was concerned that Bob was spending too much money, especially since she was going to be out of work on medical leave. So she's like, hey, I appreciate that, but this is really not the best time to, buy jewelry.
Sure. And they probably have hospital bills and stuff like that.
Yep. Disconcerted by this, Pam calls up her good friend, Lynda Drews, who's the author of the book, about her find. And Lynda, who spells her name with a Y, this is very important, and her husband, Jim, were both part of the running group.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to the jewelry receipt, Pam told Lynda with a Y that she found a confusing entry on Bob's September calendar. Pam said that the entry said Lynda's birthday, but Lynda was spelled with an I and not a Y.
Oh, so who's Lynda with an I?
So Pam was confused because the date in the calendar was the wrong date for Lynda with a Y, right?
Mm-hmm.
For her birthday. And she was like, this is super weird. And she was like, it's nice that Bob might have tried to remember like a good friend's birthday, but there were just a lot of things. You missed the mark.
You missed the mark.
It's the wrong spelling and it's the wrong day. And so it wouldn't be long before Pam, unfortunately, discovered what that calendar event meant.
Was it a rendezvous?
Since Bob was a major in the Marine Corps Reserves, he had to drill 1 weekend a month. And just before Bob was to leave for his October reserve weekend in Texas, Pam went to put a thoughtful card inside his travel bag before he left, as she usually did. While doing so, Pam found a massage book in his bag, which she had never seen before. When she opened it, a letter from a woman named Lynda with an I fell out.
Oh.
So I'm going to be trying to be real respectful here, but this woman's name is a hot mess express. And so Lynda Vanden Langenberg.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to refer to her as Lynda V.
Okay, yeah.
Lynda V was an elementary school special education teacher that was bubbly, charming, athletic, and vivacious by all accounts.
Yeah.
Pam had met Lynda V on several occasions over the course of the previous year, since Lynda V was a runner and was in some of the same running circles as Pam and Bob.
Oh, she knew her?
She knew her.
Ooh.
That year, Bob had run a school-sponsored fitness and jogging clinic, which is where he met Lynda Vanden Langenberg, Lynda V. Quickly, the interactions between Bob and Lynda V became questionable to some of the friends of Bob and Pam. And since Bob and Lynda V, when they would go running at this like fitness clinic, a lot of times, even though Bob was the leader, he and Lynda would just go off ahead of the rest of the group and leave the group behind.
Oh.
And people were like, that's weird.
Yeah.
And at one point, one of Bob's colleagues was looking out of their office window and noticed Bob's van off in the corner of the school's parking lot. This colleague then saw Lynda V getting into the van and neither Bob nor Lynda V exiting the vehicle for at least 30 minutes.
Oh no, was the van rocking?
And like literally in Lynda's book, one of the colleagues was like, dang, Bob, you should have put a sign on that's like, don't come a knocking when the van's a rockin'. So everybody started to kind of have their suspicions.
Right.
And at this point, Pam had no idea. I mean, she's starting to get these indications, but other than that, there was no clear indication.
Mm.
And so a lot of people thought like maybe something was going on, but they just kept it to themselves for fear that they could be wrong. We've talked about this in an episode before.
We've talked about it in a bunch of episodes before where it's like, what if you're wrong? Again, Brenda would say something. She would kick down the door, set the trash can on fire. But beyond that, not very many people say stuff.
Yeah. So up until finding this card in Bob's bag, again, Pam had no suspicions or indications of Bob's infidelity.
Oh.
So when she found this card, she confronted Bob. Pam knew of Lynda V and had met her on numerous occasions. Pam had heard how Bob would talk to Lynda V during their runs despite his minimizations of these interactions. So Pam would even tell her friends, like, Bob's a really hard person to open up, and he barely even talks to me when we go on runs. So why is he opening up and talking about all this stuff with Lynda V?
Ooh, see, that right there has got to be like, that would enrage me. Where it's like, are you kidding me? Like, we've been married for how many years and you can't even say hi to me, but you're going to gab it off to this girl?
Yeah. And she had seen how confident Lynda V was and how many men noticed her in a room. So this is like salt on the wound after salt on the wound after salt on the wound.
Yeah, for sure.
Pam's insecurities flared and she demanded to know the truth. When she asked Bob, when she confronted him, he left the house for his Marine Reserves weekend without denying the allegations. He just left. And so over the course of the next few days, while Bob was in Texas for his drill, Pam even tried to call Lynda V and confront her about this. And Lynda kept saying, you need to talk to Bob, before she started ignoring her calls.
That is a worst case scenario for me. I'm sorry, but all of that is just like, ooh, that's horrible.
Yeah. And one of the things that you're going to hear me use this phrase betrayal trauma a lot. So kind of as a side note, fun fact, one of like my subspecialties in the sex addiction arena is being a betrayal trauma therapist. And essentially that is when somebody who is in an agreed upon monogamous relationship, when they find out that their partner has violated those boundaries sexually, emotionally, whatever, physically, right, the repercussion to that is what we call betrayal trauma. And at this time in the 80s, this wasn't even a coined term. People didn't even know what it was. This is where people would get the term "she's crazy" from.
Yeah.
Because when there's betrayal trauma, what happens is everything that you thought you knew is a lie. So it's like carrying a compass next to, like, in a magnetic field, because now all of a sudden you don't have a north.
Right.
How did I not know this was going on? How did I not see through this? And so I'm going to refer back to betrayal trauma a lot throughout this episode to kind of help you understand what they didn't understand in the 80s.
Right.
And one of the things, the last piece that I'll say about that is Dr. Kevin Skinner is a specialty in researching betrayal trauma. And he found that this specific study was around female betrayed partners. That after a betrayal trauma incident, they exhibited identical signs to PTSD.
Oh, I mean, I can do that.
And I think like 90% of them had diagnosable PTSD. So this is a huge thing that really disrupts a lot of areas in your life.
Yeah, for sure.
So needless to say, Pam was gutted. She was absolutely gutted. All of the reports were that Pam absolutely worshipped, idolized, put Bob on a pedestal. She thought he was the most amazing thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
In an effort to save her marriage, Pam called Bob's therapist, and the therapist agreed to do couples sessions, and Bob would eventually concede to go to couples therapy. So during this therapy session, Dr. Wellens said that Bob had 3 options. 1, you could leave Pam. 2, you could leave both women and focus on yourself and see what you want. Or 3, you can leave Lynda V and focus on healing your relationship with your wife. Okay, fair. And so Bob said he would agree to leave Lynda V. And over the next couple of months, Pam experienced a roller coaster of emotions from all of this. She confided mostly in her closest friends, including Lynda, especially Lynda, but they were her shoulder to cry on, and they were there through the severe emotional swings and breakdowns along the way. And Pam really struggled with the infidelity. She stopped eating. She lost 30 pounds, and she grappled with like crippling insecurities and fears of her family's future, which all tracks with betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
Right. So despite their marital struggles, Pam and Bob remained engaged with their running group. And so in December of 1983, Pam and Bob attended a Christmas party hosted by a couple in their running group. When Pam and Bob arrived, it quickly became apparent to the people at this party that Pam's behavior was really concerning. Pam appeared to be really highly inebriated, and when she would talk, she was slurring, her eyes would roll. And so at one point, Lynda, who was Pam's best friend, noted that what concerned her the most was Bob's apparent undisturbed response to Pam being kind of out of it.
Yeah, he's acting like, oh, well, this is Pam. She always acts like this. And
Yeah.
everybody else is like, we've never
Exactly.
seen her act like this.
Exactly.
What do you mean?
And so after several people shared their concerns about Pam's state, Bob eventually took her home. Okay, so this was a Christmas party. And so after this happened, about a week later, Pam and Lynda with a Y, met up for a jog. Lynda and Pam were regular running buddies, and Lynda was helping Pam train for an upcoming marathon. Lynda was aware that Pam was still significantly struggling from the emotional whiplash of Bob's infidelity. And so during this meeting, Pam was talking to her and she was like, oh, Lynda, I feel so bad for missing that Christmas party.
So she doesn't even remember she was there.
And Lynda was like, Pam, you were there. And Pam she was totally bewildered. She had absolutely no recollection of this party. What's that face?
That's scary. Like, that makes me think of, like, she was drugged that's what makes me think of, or that's what I think of.
And to be fair, Lynda was like, are you taking any medications? Because Pam was taking like sleeping medications, but she would only take it when Bob was out of town on drill. And so Lynda was like, is there any way that you could have accidentally mixed that with your alcohol? And Pam was like, no, I never take it when Bob's in town. But then Pam shared something that Lynda just wasn't prepared for. Pam shared that she feared that Bob was putting medication in her drinks so he could sneak out of the house to continue his affair with Lynda V.
That is awful.
And so when Pam said this, Lynda was like, I don't think Bob could ever do something like that. Like, this is out of the realm of any bell-shaped curve. Like, people don't do stuff like this. You don't drug your wife to go have an affair, right?
Right. Yeah.
No. As a sex addiction therapist, I can say people actually, they do.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like there's that line between, like, this is Hollywood and this doesn't happen to me.
Exactly.
Right?
In a small town in Wisconsin, right? Well,
right.
Green Bay is not like super small, but
no. But still, like, in a normal functioning world, you're like, that only happens in movies.
Right.
That never would happen here.
But Pam's hunch would prove to be more than insecure paranoia. Later that month, she found crushed pills in Bob's coat pockets. She took the crushed pills to a pharmacist who vaguely was like, it could be sleeping pills, And Bob was like, no, it fell out of the bottle and I stepped on it and, all of this stuff, right?
Right, yeah.
And Pam ended up telling her girlfriends, these friends, that she was afraid of Bob because of all of this stuff that was going on.
Right.
After learning of Bob's ongoing affair with Lynda V, Bob and Pam's therapist finally started to, he essentially fired them because they had written a contract that Bob signed and said, I will have no contact with Lynda. I will have the conversation. I will cut it off. And he didn't. And he just kept on and kept on and kept on. And so
Yeah.
this therapist is like, we cannot do couples therapy if you are actively engaged in an affair.
Right. Right.
So despite that, Pam continued to attend therapy with her therapist. So
Yeah.
she continued to take care of herself. She was encouraged by her therapist to set self-protective boundaries, take care of herself and her children. So she started doing that because the theme of this is Pam was always very dependent on Bob, right? Like he was her northern star, okay? And so when all this happened, she really had to start learning how to retake care of herself as a priority, right?
Absolutely. And you have to remember they met in college. Like they were very quote
Yeah.
unquote young and got married out of college. I imagine that neither of them, but Pam especially, had never had time that she was on her own without the support of Bob,
Right.
essentially.
And so in late January of 84, Pam filed separation papers, and her friends were like, good on you, girlfriend.
Oh,
Proud of
yeah.
you. She told her friends that she would not sit back and allow her husband to have no consequences while he continued his affair and living at home.
Yeah. I think that's a fair statement.
And so shortly after she had filed these papers, there was a court hearing, and Bob was ordered to vacate the home. Pam was given exclusive use of the home and the furnishings while Bob was still responsible for the monthly house payment.
Mm.
The kids were to live with Pam, but both Bob and Pam were awarded shared custody.
Okay.
And Lynda recalls in her book saying that Pam said, I was pleased with the outcome, but Bob sure wasn't.
Yeah.
But less than 2 weeks later, they reconciled and Bob moved back in.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think tigers can dye their stripes, but a lot of times they can't change their stripes.
Yeah. And of course, in my opinion, I think Bob was love bombing her. I'm so sorry. I
Yeah.
mean, it's your typical like
Right.
abusive cycle.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry as I love you so much as I'm going to change everything. You're everything I've ever wanted. And I mean, all you want is your husband back. And so,
Yeah. And I was going to say, that's what Pam ultimately wanted, right? Like she
uh-huh.
just wanted him to be like, okay, you're right. I've been, dumb in this whole thing. So yes.
Yeah, she's like, I'm going to give him a second chance. And so she told her attorneys to keep divorce proceedings in place as an insurance and that to give her 60 days before a final decision. So she knew that like it might not go the way that she hopes it would. So she told her attorneys to just hold the paperwork for 60 days. So in late March, Pam suspended the legal proceedings and she made the decision that for the next 90 days, she and Bob would work towards reconciliation and go from there. So she's like, we'll take it step by step.
Yeah, which is smart. Good for her.
And so on April 7th, Pam's friend Lynda, along with their running group, were to compete in a big half marathon event on April 7th. Pam and Lynda had been training for months for this, and Pam was super excited because she had lost weight, she gained speed, and made new personal records on her running times. At the start of the race, Lynda waited for a small gift to give Pam for such an amazing milestone event. But when the race was to begin, Pam still hadn't gotten there. And Lynda's stomach churned. She knew how excited Pam was about the race, and she would never miss it.
Yeah.
After a 10-minute delay to wait for Pam, the race director's gun finally went off, and Lynda began to run, and she started to convince herself that maybe Pam had really valid reasons for not attending. The race was slated to pass close to Pam's home, and so Lynda was like, she's probably going to be there with the kids to cheer us on because Pam was like that kind of person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When Lynda passed by this point, there was no Pam. And so she kept running. I don't know how many miles this was at this point, but when Lynda got to the finish line, she was met by some solemn-faced friends. The race director hugged her shoulder, saying, Lynda, there's no easy way to tell you this. They found Pam. She drowned.
She drowned?
She drowned.
Hmm.
And Lynda was like, she couldn't even comprehend what was going on.
Yeah.
And so back at Pam and Bob's house, law enforcement had arrived to investigate the scene. When Deputy Coroner Jeannie Williams arrived, she found a body of a woman lying on the carpeted floor next to the large bathtub in the master bedroom. This was Pam. It appeared as if she was just simply asleep. Coroner Williams quickly worked to do her preliminary examination to try to figure out what happened to Pam. The depth of the water was measured, samples taken from the tub, and after draining the water, the debris was secured to be tested.
Mm-hmm.
Evidence from Pam's body was collected, including nail scrapings and a black hair that was caught between her left and middle finger. When detectives spoke with Bob that morning, he was crying uncontrollably. They began to ask him about Pam and the day leading up to her death. They asked if she was on any medications. He said she was on some sleeping pills. And he said the night before, he had arrived home from an Illinois naval base at around 10:30 that night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Bob consented to investigators searching their homes and vehicles, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And what starts the first twist to this super bizarre case is detectives found Pam's green running suit on top of the washing machine. The top was dry, the bottoms were wet. The panties inside the suit bottoms were wet and they had dirt on them.
Oh.
They searched the van and the garage and found that the front passenger seat of the van was wet, along with mud and leaves on the floorboard.
Yikes.
The more they investigated, the more bizarre things became. Detective Sergeant James Taylor had a gut feeling Bob was involved from the very beginning, since he had investigated the Bulik's August break-in and assault.
Mm-hmm.
He knew Pam had died in only one of three ways. It was either an accident, it was a suicide, or it was a homicide.
Right. Yep.
So District Attorney Royce Finn arrived knowing Pam's death could be more than an accidental drowning. So authorities alerted the district attorney, right, to start that, I guess, protocol, if you will. And Bob was taken downtown for an interview since the case was being handled as a suspicious death.
Mm-hmm.
He was interviewed for about 2.5 hours, waived his right to an attorney, and all reports noted that Bob was cooperative, calm, but somewhat cold.
Mm-hmm.
When asked about the day prior, Bob shared that he had driven down to an Illinois naval base to catch a military flight to Denver, because Denver was where he had his Marine Corps drill that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He said on the way to Illinois, to this naval base, he had car trouble and he missed his flight. So he decided to book a $100 commercial flight ticket to Denver the following day, but in the end decided it wasn't worth the hassle. He could do drill on a different weekend because he could. So based on that, he was like, I then decided to return home. He was like, my wife and I had been having troubles, like there was a lot of this stuff going on. And so I wanted to surprise her. So he drove back to Green Bay, which is I think it's like a 2.5-hour drive. He parked in the Preble High School parking lot that was about a half a mile from his home and then walked to his house. He said he wanted to surprise Pam, and that's why he parked a half a mile away in the high school parking lot. He said he had entered the home around 10:30, but Pam's surprise quickly turned into suspicion. She accused him that he had been with Lynda, and thus they began to argue.
Mm-hmm.
And he said once they started to argue, he went to bed. And at some point, he was awoken by an engine running in the garage, and Pam was not in bed.
Okay.
He entered the garage and found Pam in the passenger seat of the van, and he couldn't rouse her from her sleep. So he found her sitting in the van in a closed garage with the van on, like it was a suicide attempt.
Okay. All right.
So in this interrogation, Bob said he carried Pam into the house and put her to bed. In the morning, he remembered she was to run a half marathon, and he said she was groggy. He knew her legs had been bothering her, so then he placed her in their large bathtub. He said that he checked on her a while later, and she was face down in the tub. He pulled her out of the tub, called his therapist, and told his therapist that Pam was dead. He said he called his therapist because he didn't know what to do with the kids, because he didn't want the kids to see their mother that way. His therapist was like, you need to call 911. So he took the kids to the mall and dropped them off and returned home and called 911.
Okay. Sure.
The people who knew Pam best all reported having a similar response to hearing about the news of Pam's bathtub drowning death. One word, strange. Everybody was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Nobody could quite understand how Pam died in her bathtub in her own home. Everyone knew that there were problems in Pam and Bob's marriage, but no one could ever comprehend that there was anything more than a freak accident afoot. Pam's family members and close friends were left with more questions than answers. They were painfully waiting throughout the investigation process, noting it alarming when the newspaper started to report that there was foul play being investigated.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew what that could mean, and it was too surreal for the people who knew Pam and Bob for this to be happening.
Yeah.
In the days following Pam's death, the Green Bay community prepared for Pam's funeral. Bob initially planned to have a closed casket, but a family friend who had worked in funeral homes encouraged Bob to do an open casket for closure for the families. And so what Bob agreed to do was do a small, like a viewing with close family and friends, and then a closed casket for the rest of the process. During the showing, Lynda recalls in her book about seeing Pam in the open casket saying, "I couldn't fathom why Bob would ever let us see her like this. Pam had bruising on her left eye and forehead that was unsuccessfully covered up with makeup. Her face was swollen and didn't resemble Pam."
Oh, that's horrifying.
To add to the bewilderment, at the funeral, Lynda was standing with two friends and they all played bridge together, including Pam. And as they were gathered, Bob passed and said, "Looks like you gals are missing your fourth for bridge."
Golly, what a jerk. That's
Now,
ridiculous.
we all know that grief looks different on different people, right? Lynda dismissed this, or she dismissed his reactions as grief and gave Bob the benefit of the doubt. Now, I'm going to give you guys a little bombshell right now. At Pam's funeral service, Lynda was once again baffled, bewildered, conflicted when the minister read a poem that was requested by Bob. This poem was a poem that Pam had found in his pants pocket in February.
It was a poem from Lynda with a I?
No, it was like a poem that you read at a funeral. And he had it in his pants pocket, and Pam found that in February.
Crap.
And so Pam had told Lynda about this when she found it. And then when Lynda was sitting at that funeral and she heard the minister giving this poem, she was like, "What?"
Almost say what?
Yeah.
Oh, that gives me chills.
A few days after Pam had died, detectives received her autopsy results from Dr. Scarpole, which arguably were disturbing. He found considerable trauma to Pam's body, particularly to the head.
Mm-hmm.
Her left eye showed bruising that extended up to her forehead, likely caused by blunt force trauma.
Oh.
Either Pam had been struck or she struck her head on something.
Mm-hmm.
Other bruising was on the top of Pam's head and above her back neckline. And Dr. Scarpole also discovered a hemorrhage in the right cerebral peduncle, which is a structure that attaches the brain to the spinal cord, and it appeared to be recent. A rotational twist of the head is what usually causes that injury. There was also bruising to Pam's right index finger and wrist and the back of her left elbow. Dr. Scarpole also discovered a high amount of carbon monoxide in Pam's system, which would prove fatal for most. But ultimately, her cause of death was drowning. Pam was alive when she entered the bathwater.
Oh, gosh.
From day one, detectives were careful to treat Pam's death as suspicious. The autopsy revealed more questions than answers, but it proved there was likely more to this case than what met the eye.
Right.
The detectives were careful to document everything in Pam and Bob's household, and they questioned the couple's family and friends. One consideration was whether Pam's death was a suicide, and this would be a key dispute throughout the rest of this case.
Mm-hmm.
Pam's brother Bill had spoken to her the Friday prior to her death, and he said that she seemed down but not suicidal.
Yeah.
Other people who knew Pam believed she'd never leave the kids.
Right.
During the investigation into her death, officers identified that Pam did not appear to be suicidal, as evidenced by future activities she had planned, such as the half marathon that she was planning on running the day she was found, an upcoming family vacation to the Bahamas, and other events throughout the summer. So she was forward thinking.
Yeah.
Lynda Drews was then questioned since she was one of Pam's closest friends. During her interview, Lynda told investigators she had to know whether Pam was naked when she drowned. She was like, I need to know if she was naked or not, because nobody had any details. Nobody knew what happened. They just knew that Pam was dead and that she supposedly drowned.
Right.
The detective said that when she was found, she was naked. And this fact alone assured Lynda that Pam did not commit suicide. So in her book, Lynda recalls that at one point she went through an ordeal where she had just given childbirth. She had just given birth. She was in the bathtub. She slipped. She dislocated her shoulder. And the EMTs had to be called and pretty much like scoop her out of this tub.
Oh, yeah.
And so in her book, she recalls telling Pam this prior to Pam's death. And Pam said, before I'd ever call 911 and let the medics see me naked, I'd grit my teeth and deal with the pain. And everybody who knew Pam knew she was terribly self-conscious with her body and would never let anybody find her that way.
Oh, so if she had quote unquote committed suicide, she probably would have been clothed in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Lynda was like, as soon as I found out that she was naked, I knew in my heart of hearts that this was not a suicide. Even in death, Pam would never be found naked.
Oh, it gives me chills. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is horrible.
During the investigation, it became clear that Bob was somewhat of, like I said before, somewhat of an enigma to those around him. There was a consensus among the friend group, especially within the running group, that nobody really knew the real Bob. The men in the group couldn't get a good read on him, and he never divulged anything personal or worthwhile to build bonds with them. He only talked about running, work, and the military.
Yeah.
Investigators also found out that Pam and Bob were in some financial trouble. Pam had found this out after she looked at their bank books and didn't know how they'd ever climb out of that hole. It seemed like Bob was kind of a compulsive spender.
Oh, man.
Investigators finally got their hands on the Bulik's family therapy documents, sorry. Pam, what they found out was Pam was being treated for dependent personality disorder, which makes sense because it is a disorder where an individual is overly reliant on others, kind of needs to be taken care of, and has a huge fear of separation.
Okay.
However, during the therapy, she seemed to be getting better, but Bob's therapist believed Bob struggled with psychopathic personality disorder and said that Bob had lied to him more than any client he had ever seen over 17 years.
So as a therapist, are you allowed to say, Bob, I hate to break it to you, you're a psychopath?
Oh,
like how do you go about that?
I think so. Okay. There's no diagnosis for like a psychopath per the DSM. Okay. So like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that I use to diagnose people, you can diagnose somebody with like antisocial personality disorder. And so that is in that same ballpark. But I can't ethically diagnose somebody as a psychopath because that takes usually a psychiatrist or a psychologist who has the training and assessments for that kind of thing to diagnose that.
Okay.
But usually, I mean, not all people who struggle with antisocial personality disorder are psychopaths, but most psychopaths have antisocial.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't know how his therapist did it. He might have just been like, you're a psychopath. I don't know. He noted that Bob was manipulative, he lacked empathy and remorse, and was a chronic liar. Bob's therapist also thought that Bob was involved in the Bulik's break-in attack in August. So remember that whole break-in. And that's why his therapist had encouraged Pam to like move out and get Bob out of the house and that kind of thing without explicitly saying that, because there was no proof and there was no, like, he couldn't warn her that, you know, Bob was homicidal because he didn't come out and say that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And according to Pam's therapist, much of her therapy was focused on building up her self-esteem primarily. And they noted that early on, she put Bob on a pedestal and totally idolized him, which tracks from what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
And so when the affair happened, it was like her fantasy completely shattered.
Yes.
So just kind of as a really interesting side note, there's this model by a woman named Pia Melody, and she writes a really good book, and it's called Facing Love Addiction. And she has this model called the la cycle, and it's a love addiction, love avoidance cycle. And it's fascinating because the love addiction cycle, really matches a lot of like Pam's personality type. And so there's kind of like a fear of abandonment. There's a fear of intimacy a little bit. And you put your partner on a pedestal. You have this like big fantasy about who they really are. And then something happens, and it like that's like the third step in this cycle. The fantasy shatters, and then you have what's called emotional withdrawal. So it's literally like what everybody described Pam going through of like not eating, being emotional, being all over the place because it's really strong emotions, because it's like withdrawing from your drug. That person's your drug.
Yeah.
And so when investigators tried to talk to Lynda V, she refused after consulting with her attorney. Since Lynda V did not believe any criminal acts had occurred, so she didn't believe that Bob was guilty of anything regarding Pam, she found no reason to discuss her personal life with investigators. So investigators...
She was like, I mean, everything was fine when we were in the van together, like in the park.
Yeah, we were rocking, but he wasn't knocking me.
I mean, he was, but in like the best kind of ways.
But not in the face, maybe. I don't know how people get down when they're rocking a van in their work parking lot.
It's wild. It's a jungle out there.
It just reminds me of Monk.
That's it. That's totally it.
Okay, so investigators, Lynda was like, nah, I'm not going to talk to you. And so they found a loophole. They were like, that's cool. We're going to talk to Kevin Vanden Langenberg, who was her recent ex-husband.
Oh, man. Oh, Kevin.
And so what they found out was Lynda actually had filed for divorce from Kevin shortly before the Bulik's break-in and assault in their home. And when they spoke with Kevin, he confirmed investigators' hunches that he was pretty sure that Lynda had been having an affair in the latter part of their marriage. And he was pretty sure it was with Bob, because he said that one time there was like flowers delivered to her. I don't know if it was to the house or to work, but it was like signed Bob.
Your lover.
And the dude's like, well, that's not me.
XOXO Bob, the one who's married to Pam, your lover. I think it might have been that Bob.
So then what happens next is the DA held a closed John Doe hearing to listen to certain people and experts' testimonies in the Bulik case. Remember whenever we covered this topic in was it the Riley Fox episode where they had that John Doe hearing?
No, it was in Father...
Oh, that's right. Ryan.
Yeah, it was in Father Ryan's case.
Okay, yeah. And so this John Doe hearing is to establish whether there's enough evidence to take this case to trial. And so it goes in front of a judge, and it's civil by nature, not criminal. It's just to say if we have enough. And during this hearing, the judge decided that he would not allow the home invasion evidence to be included in the trial, since there had been no arrests and no proof of Bob Bulik's involvement.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So he was like, it could really sway a jury.
Sure.
Because at this point, it literally is just hearsay, because Bob wasn't arrested. He wasn't indicted. There were no charges for that.
Yeah.
And so Bob, upon being subpoenaed to this hearing, was upset because he didn't want to miss the trip to the Bahamas that was 2 days following.
With his kids.
With his kids.
Minus his wife.
Yes. And while Bob and his kids were on vacation in the Bahamas, he asked 2 of Pam's friends to pack up Pam's belongings.
Okay.
So he goes on vacation to the Bahamas with his kids. And he was like, hey, you guys, can you pack up Pam's stuff? Because I can't stomach it. And so they were like, absolutely, sure, we'll do that for you. And so while they were doing this, they found a box of cards and love notes, all between Bob and Lynda V. And they found a copy of Lynda V's will in this box that authorized Bob to take custody of her son if anything were to happen to her.
That's really strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is it with people keeping boxes of mysterious things? Like, I feel like I have missed the boat. Like, I feel like I need a box. I don't know what I'd keep in there. Like, maybe my kids' teeth. Do you keep your kids' teeth?
Well, she hasn't lost any teeth yet, so I haven't gotten to that point.
Well,
There's a lock of my hair that's still in some, like, drawer in one of mom and dad's like furniture compartments that we rescued from Katrina, and it's literally like hair that was in Katrina and flooded and was there for like years.
You're
Not
gross.
weird.
Y'all are gross.
Don't say y'all. I didn't have anything to do with that.
Y'all are weird.
That's Brenda. Brenda put my cut hair in a box.
I got your hair in a box.
And so what's even more sinister is one of Pam's friends, while they were cleaning up her stuff, found Pam's diary.
Oh man, I'm
Chelsea,
so glad.
finally someone actually wrote things in their diary.
I'm so proud. I'm so proud of this diary moment right now. Like, y'all need to keep a diary. I mean, I don't, of course, but everybody else, y'all need to keep a diary.
And the last entry was the Sunday before Pam's death, and it was titled, "I Am Afraid." I'm going to put that one on pause and we're going to circle back to that, okay? Obviously, besides the affair and not wanting to lose anything in the divorce proceeding, investigators found that Pam had a $25,000 life insurance policy along with whatever the school contract called for. So I think within her contract, she also would get some sort of life insurance policy for in the case of a death.
Okay.
Upon further investigation, investigators searched Bob's locker and desk at the school, and there they found a book titled How to Survive the Loss of a Loved One, and it was purchased just a few months before Pam's death.
Why are y'all so weird? Why don't y'all have better hobbies?
And the facts considered and evidence collected raised sufficient inference that Bob Bulik was responsible for Pam's injuries, for placing her in the van, starting it, and later placing her in the tub, that he was responsible for her death, and police believed it was premeditated. They believe Bob wanted the house, the kids, and Lynda V, and the only way he could have it all was to get rid of Pam.
Okay.
So, about a month after Pam's death, a warrant was signed for Bob's arrest. He was picked up outside of his home, taken to Brown County Jail, and immediately requested an attorney, which I'm not going to hate on because after talking to Dr. K and Dr. A, I'm like, good for you.
I was going to say, like, Lynda V and Bob both being like, nope, my lips are sealed until I get my attorney. I'm like, you know what? All right, good for y'all.
And so after Bob's arrest, the news went into a downright frenzy. Channel 5's news said, quote, according to District Attorney Nays and the Green Bay Police, a report from the state crime lab proves Pamela Bulik's death was no accident. The autopsy report shows shortly before her death, Pam was severely beaten and probably knocked unconscious. She was then exposed to fatal levels of carbon monoxide in the family van. Police conjecture that that's where her husband dumped her body. Later that day, she ended up in the bathtub where she drowned. So this was like what the news was throwing into everything. The media was just saying all of this.
I was like, is that ethical? We haven't had a trial. We haven't had a court hearing yet, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Journalists can scoop out what they
First
want.
Amendment, hashtag First Amendment. You just say whatever you want.
Yeah. Okay. I guess. I mean, I don't know how that works. I'm not a journalist, so I don't know how that works.
Okay.
And so Bob was retained in jail on a $100,000 bond, which was the largest bond ever ordered by a judge in that county up to that point in time. Okay. Bob's bond was eventually posted with the help of his father, equity in the Bulik house, and selling vehicles. He and his attorney then entered the plea of not guilty, and thus began the discovery phase, which is like sharing documents and statements before you actually go to trial. Bob's trial was set for December 3rd. During Bob Bulik's trial, he was charged with first-degree murder, something that shocked the community since the accused, his girlfriend, and the victim were all professionals and they were teachers. No case like this had ever occurred in Green Bay before. The defense and the prosecution both put up a hell of a fight. Bob Bulik's attorney, William Apple, argued it was an accident. The prosecution argued it was premeditated. And before I get into a little bit of this back and forth, you guys are going to have to purchase Lynda Drew's book, Run at Destruction, because she puts all of the details of all of the parts of the trial and the testimonies like play by play in her book. And it's so thorough and informative, and there's just no way I could fit that. So I just had to really just kind of tip of the iceberg, right? Cliff note it. And so one of the things that was identified throughout this trial process, and the first odd thing about the whole really bizarre case of Pam Bulik's death, was Bob being home in the first place. And the big question was why? Why would you go home to surprise your wife with a gift after you've been fighting and still carrying on an affair? Why would you park a half a mile away from your house to quote unquote surprise her? Why would you do all of this stuff? It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, why would I do it? I wouldn't do any of that. I'd be like, you can get me a gift. I'm parking myself here at my house, and I'm going to put idiot until I'm not mad anymore. So I wouldn't do any of that personally. Why Bob would do it? Because Bob is apparently a psychopath. I mean,
and he had missed his flight out of the naval base to Denver, and instead of taking another military flight, why would he book one himself? Right? Why not just take another military flight? This, according to the prosecution, was going to be his alibi. He was going to have car trouble, then come home, put Pam into the van, make it look like a suicide, then drive back to the airport and catch a flight. But the thing that he wasn't expecting was that the kids were up when they weren't supposed to be. And all of the reports were that Bob was, he was a Marine, so everything in the house was really structured, pretty rigid. The kids went to bed at 9 o'clock. They were always in bed at 9. But that night that he left, Pam had allowed them to stay up. So when he got home at 10:30, they weren't supposed to be up. And they saw him. So he couldn't just turn around and be like, oh, you didn't see me. You know what I mean? And so I think that at least the argument was that it put pressure on him to follow through with this botched plan, according to prosecutors, right? Pam, according to pathologists, had considerable bruising to her body and suffered sufficient blunt trauma to her head to cause unconsciousness several hours prior to death. The prosecution theorized Pam's bruises were due to a fight with Bob before he put her in the van, waited until she was nearly dead from carbon monoxide poisoning, and then placed her in the tub where he held her head under until she drowned. The defense argued that the bruises occurred after Bob discovered Pam in the van and from him dragging her out, bumping her head on the garage floor, and additional bruising could have happened when she slipped and hit her head in the tub.
Yeah.
So both are...
I was going to say both of them are pretty plausible.
Yeah. Pam, who died of drowning in the bathtub, had suffered sufficient carbon monoxide poisoning prior to drowning, and according to the medical reports, it was enough to render her near comatose and unable to walk and talk. And that's also why they theorized that she had urinated in that seat, because remember, the seat was wet.
Oh, right.
And they said it was likely due because of the carbon monoxide poisoning. And so I think the biggest piece of this whole trial was, why did Bob not call 911? If you walk out into the garage and find your wife sitting in a vehicle while it's running with the garage door closed, she's comatose, she's urinated herself, why would you not call 911? Why would you go and put her in bed and let her sleep it off? If she was still groggy, quote unquote, why would you put her in a tub if she's groggy?
Again, I wouldn't do all those things, but I don't know, things were wild back then. I don't know what people did back then.
And expert witnesses all agreed, and this was kind of the hard part about this process, was all of the experts on both sides of the prosecution and the defense agreed that if Bob had called 911 when he found her in the van, she'd still be alive and likely with minimal damage from the carbon monoxide poisoning.
Yeah, that's a kicker.
The police investigation indicated that the engine cowling had prevented Pam from starting the van from the passenger seat where Bob had said he had found her. So remember, she was sitting in the passenger side, and during this trial process, what they were able to identify is the engine cover, the kind of big lump from transmission and engine, whatever, would have prevented her from reaching over and starting the van.
I was going to say, who gets on the passenger side? Other than...
And most of the cars back then, you'd have to push on the brake to start it too.
Well, all cars, even today, you have to push on brakes to start the car.
I don't think all of them, but
I think all of them.
Pretty sure I had a car that I didn't have to put on the brake to start. I could be wrong, though.
You're wrong.
Wrong.
You're wrong.
And so why would somebody, so this is one of the big questions that posed in the trial, why would somebody who was intent on committing suicide get in the driver's side, start the vehicle, then get out, walk around, and sit in the passenger side?
Okay, so driver's side, start the vehicle, get out, walk around, get on the other side. That's a lot. That's a lot of extra steps.
It's a lot of extra steps. And I honestly don't think that, I don't know. I feel like, but like at least my experience working with betrayed partners, they're so pissed that they want to see the pain that
Yeah.
you inflicted on them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my experience as a therapist working with that.
Yeah.
And so also in the trial, they talked about the toxicology screen. And so Pam's toxicology screen included the prescription drug found in Bob's empty sleeping pill container that was recovered from the bathroom wastebasket, but it was noted to be of a therapeutic level. And so the experts did not believe that she was drugged, if you will.
Right.
So this rules out her taking any pills in an attempt to take her life. It also gives reasonable doubt to the idea of Bob drugging Pam, right? So if it's a therapeutic level, then arguably it wasn't enough for him to try to drug her to carry all this stuff out.
Yeah, which I have thoughts on that as well, just because everybody metabolizes drugs at a different rate, but I'm not going to get into all of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just think that's a little weak.
Yeah. And so kind of to sum it all up, there were expert examinations and cross-examinations around Pam's mental health, the carbon monoxide poisoning and its effects, and disagreements among the medical examiners regarding her injuries. And so again, if you want to deep dive into this, I would just read the book. And during the trial, Dr. Helen Young would come in, and she was a pathologist, and she testified and agreed with the initial autopsy result from Dr. Scarpel from his postmortem examination and autopsy notes, saying that the nature of the bruising on Pam's body in the pictures indicated that she would have been in a fight several hours prior to death. But the children who did testify at the trial, they were brought in to testify, they said they never heard any fights the night of June 6th or the morning of June 7th. And all the therapists that met with Pam, whether individually or couples, did not feel that Pam was suicidal. So they brought up her journal as a huge point of arguably contention in this process. And everybody was trying to pick apart her words. You know, was it ominous or was it positive? Or, you know, like they were just trying to figure out what she was trying to say. And on the prosecution side, they were saying, listen, she listed all of these goals. Like there was one part in her journal where she listed 6 categories of personal goals. She wanted to develop piano skills. She wanted to play in a symphony. She wanted to sing in a choir. She wanted to learn how to write poetry. And the last entry in her journal said, I want to live. Capital LIVE underlined, I want to live. The defense is saying that's what suicidal people put in their journals. And the prosecution is saying, no, that's forward thinking, saying like she wanted to live. She wanted to enjoy life. So literally that's what I mean. It was all these points of, was she suicidal? Was she not suicidal?
Right.
Did what she write in her journal mean that she wanted to live, or was it really code for she actually wanted to commit suicide but wouldn't say it?
Okay.
And in closing statements, the prosecutor, DA Finn, said, we can't bring Pamela Bulik before you so you can get to know the victim. I'm sure you've tried to imagine the kind of person she was. And he continued to share that Pam had been a wonderful, caring, and devoted mother who loved her children immensely. She was a doting wife who loved her husband despite her love being rejected by him. She was a passionate teacher and loved her students. She was in many ways a very strong person. She bore this tremendous hurt of finding out her husband was having an affair in October, yet she did not lose her capacity to love and forgive. And I think I really loved that DA Finn brought that in, because one of the things that Lynda kind of mentions is, unfortunately, in the trial, people didn't really get to know Pam. It was really about what happened and if Bob was guilty, right? Like there were even some feedback that some of the jurors really were like, I don't even really know much or remember much about Pam herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 8 grueling days of trial, it was deliberation time for the jury on December 12th, 1984. A short 6 hours later, the jury reached their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert J. Bulik, guilty of homicide by reckless conduct.
Okay. So how does that differ from like first-degree murder or things like that?
It's a much lesser charge.
Okay. So it pretty much was like you killed her because you didn't call 911 when you found her and you were neglectful to her obvious needs. Is that
correct?
Kind of.
Yeah, the jury wasn't convinced that there was premeditation, right? They weren't convinced that it was a crime of passion.
Right.
They didn't know what to think, but they all agreed that
He could have done a better job of
yes,
saving her.
yes.
He
And she
neglected
died
her.
because of his reckless actions
Yeah.
around her situation.
Okay. I mean, I feel like that's fair.
Yeah. And so on February 7th, 1985, Bob Bulik received the maximum sentence of 10 years by Judge Richard G. Greenwood, who said his wife's death was, quote, no accident. So the judge was just like, nah.
Yeah.
Judge Greenwood argued that Bob had a motive and that he had a, quote, highly selective memory about the events that preceded his wife's death on April 7th. So the judge was just kind of like, because Bob, when he got up on the stand and when they ask him questions, he'd be like, I don't remember. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. You know, I guess I don't ever really, that it kind of popped into my head just now when you said that, but well, I think, or at least I kind of forget that sometimes it seems that judges kind of disagree with what a jury decides upon. And I guess I don't ever think about that. Like, I kind of forget that the judge is like an actual human being who has an opinion on all of
Right.
the evidence that has been presented to him. So that's interesting that he was just like, yeah, well, lucky for you, you had a good jury, but this wasn't an accident.
Well, and I gotta say, like, I think, at least from what Lynda portrays in her book, this Judge Greenwood was a really great judge because he was by the letter of the law. And so he knew about the home invasions. He knew about other evidence that wasn't allowed in the trial. So, like, he had a different perspective, but because of, you know, whatever legal stipulations, he wouldn't allow that in the trial. So he had even more understanding of the case than the jurors got.
That's a stand-up dude.
Stand-up dude. And can I just remind everybody that this was all of this whole episode is all because it's over a piece of ass.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Literally.
Yeah.
This whole thing, this entire process, ripple effect for generations to come is because it is literally over wanting to have a piece of ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's a fable story in there somewhere.
Yeah. And so just to kind of throw some things in at the end, kind of about what transpired after everything happened, after the dust settled. About 2 weeks after Bob's sentencing, Pam's father was sent to a mental health center to undergo analysis and treatment for alcohol dependency.
Oh, man.
Earlier that week, after Pam's stepmother told him she had contacted an attorney, Pam's father, William Metzger, grabbed a loaded 20-gauge shotgun and announced there will be no divorce. He aimed the gun at his wife, who had managed to secure it, and called police. So this dude relapsed and had an absolute breakdown after the sentencing.
Okay, so Pam's dad was married to Pam's stepmom,
Yes.
and he was like going cray, and the stepmom was like, I'm done.
Yeah, and she threatened to divorce him, and he was just like, there will be no divorce.
Oh.
And this poor family, Charles, because did I tell you, I don't remember if I mentioned it in this episode or if we mentioned it when we talked to Lynda, but Pam's brother, Bill, he was a prisoner of war for 6 years.
Oh, yeah. You did mention this. Like, yeah, this is one of those, like, oh, what is that movie, Holes? Have you seen
I've never seen it, but I know what you're talking about.
It's the best movie, but it's like, who broke their promise to a gypsy? Because this family is cursed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Pam's brother, Bill, and her sister-in-law, Bill's wife, Bonnie, they tried to obtain custody of the children, of Alex and Abby. But in late March, Lynda V. applied for a marriage license, and she and Bob Bulik were married at the Waupun prison in March of 1985.
Shut up.
And so what that means is she acted as temporary guardian for the kids, so she got them.
Oh, shut up. Shut all the way up. That is dirty. I'm sorry. Like, no offense, but that's dirty.
That's dirty. Pam's dad ended up dying in 1985, and Bob applied for parole in 1987, but it was denied. In late October, Lynda V. filed for divorce. She'd been saddled with his children, his house payments, and other debts. She agreed again to act as their guardian until his release from prison. So she was like, yeah, I'll watch him until he gets out, even though I want a divorce. But by September of 1988, she was like, nah. And she got a new boyfriend, and Bob's kids didn't fit into that. And so both children were placed into separate foster homes in the Bulik's neighborhood.
Shut up. That is criminal. That, I think, is more upsetting than anything else in this entire story. Like, not to be insensitive, but these poor kids.
Yeah.
That is, that there are just no words for that. That is unexcusable.
So Lynda, I really hope that Lynda, like, you know, went to therapy and figured her shit out.
I was going to say, Lynda, let's hope you are doing better than you were in the 90s, because
you were a hot mess express.
Hot mess express.
So Bob continued writing letters to the judge begging for parole so he could take care of his children. And the judge, like, from what it sounds like and what I gathered, this is just kind of my perspective, the judge was like so sick of his shit. He was just like, no, that's for the parole board to sort through. That's not my problem.
What an absolute...
He was like, the judge was like, they're safe with their foster families. Like, they're okay, but parole's denied. And so Bob finally had to sell his home because Lynda was no longer taking care of all of it. And she ended up remarrying on December 29th of 1988. So she headed off to on a honeymoon with her third husband, who was a Brown County probate official, who was a friend of the local attorneys and law enforcement.
Right.
And so finally, after serving 6 years in prison, Bob Bulik was released in April of 1990. He ended up going to school to get his PhD and got custody of his kids back. And the thing I'll say about this is all of the reports, even the people who believed Bob had something to do with Pam's death, they were like, he is a wonderful father. Like, he was stable with them. He was good with them. Yep. So, I mean, at least maybe there's the plus to that.
Yeah, I mean, people have redeeming qualities 9 times out of 10. I just wish they weren't. I just don't be dumb. Like, don't be dumb. Don't be dumb.
Yeah. And when Bob was incarcerated, his teaching license was accidentally renewed in error. Like, he didn't lose his teaching license. But he had subpoenaed his parole agent for a character reference for whenever he was trying to make parole. But it backfired because Bob's agent was like, he's self-centered, he's arrogant and condescending, and said that he was a man who didn't like authority or want to be lumped in with other criminals. And so the teaching community was just like, nah. And so the teaching community rose hell, and finally his teaching license was permanently revoked because everybody in Green Bay was like, no, absolutely not.
Oh, man. I mean, it gets to the point where you almost start feeling bad for this dude. You know what I mean? It's just like,
literally all over a piece of ass, you guys.
I know. Just like,
literally, he didn't want to lose his house and his kids. He wanted to carry out this affair instead of leaving his wife. And she ended up dying, maybe at his hands or not. I don't have all of the evidence and all that stuff, but he ends up losing all of it anyways. Plus more, he lost his teaching license. He lost his respect in the community. He lost everything, right? All because of a piece of ass.
Yeah.
And so Pam's children grew up and got married, tried to settle down, tried to live normal lives. Neither seemed to discuss their mother's tragedy a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
The children appeared to be doing well as could be expected, but there's no doubt that they were absolutely traumatized by the loss of their mom.
Yeah.
And along with the whole trial and court process and all of the ripple effect afterwards. And the one thing that I wanted to leave this with, which was one of my favorite things in Lynda's book, Lynda received this letter from the prosecutors after Bob's trial. And it said, "Lynda, we are truly grateful for your help and encouragement. We could not have put this case together without the assistance of Pam's friends. My only regret is that I'll never get a chance to know Pam personally, as others will not. Perhaps that was the worst crime that Bob committed." And that is the really sad, really infuriating, really bizarre and crazy and wild and stupid and unnecessary case of the arguably murder of Pamela Bulik.
Yeah. I don't know, the disregard. I feel like it's the disregard of Pamela Bulik. You know,
Yeah.
really. I'm sorry. I just still can't get over the fact that these kids lose their mom, lose their dad, and then have to move in with their dad's lover.
That caused arguably this whole
That caused this
meltdown,
whole
this whole
thing,
process breakdown.
who
Yeah.
would eventually abandon them. I'm sorry. I can't get over this. Like, in what universe, in what dimension is that okay?
Yeah.
Happens to Betsy. But good for them. Good for them for getting married. And it sound, like for doing their
kids.
thing and trying to.
The kids?
Yeah.
Oh, not Pam and
No,
or
no, no,
not
no,
Bob and
no,
Lynda V.
no. The kids, like, good for them for like getting married and living a
Yeah.
life. And
You guys are gonna think I'm crazy for saying this. You're gonna think I'm a terrible therapist, and that's okay. That's is your prerogative to have that opinion. When I have people come to me and they're like stepping out on their partners, right? And they're in an agreed upon monogamous relationship. Listen, I'm like, go find sex work. Go pay for sex. I mean, if that's what you want to do, if you want to just like knock your boots all day, buddy, go do that. But don't drag somebody through your mud and muck. And I'm not, y'all are like, I can't believe you told somebody with an intimacy disorder to go have sex with a sex worker. I'm saying, if you want to be a porn addict, you want to be a sex addict, if you don't want to change that behavior, that's fine. But don't drag your family down with you.
wow, yeah, or just get a divorce. I mean, really, like,
But look, I should have been clear. Yes, like, don't cheat on her with a sex worker. Like, leave.
right.
Like, if for whatever reason, like, just step out of the relationship and then do whatever else you want to do with your spare time and your spare hand.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care.
I really do. I just wish people would get a divorce. And because here's the deal. Like, I've had friends. I had a friend in high school whose parents got a divorce. And then after high school, a couple of years later, they had gotten back and they were remarried. Like, they
Yeah, it happens.
rekindled that flame. But I'm like, just get a divorce. Don't drag everybody into it. Don't drag I mean, I get that like kids shouldn't have to go through a divorce, but let me tell you what more they shouldn't have to go through. They shouldn't have to go through you somehow letting your wife die, somehow living with your lover, somehow being abandoned by your lover. Like, stop it. No.
Yeah. I think the thing that still kind of boggles my mind is people still think that having a quote unquote broken home is like so traumatic for children. I mean, can there be trauma from the experience? Absolutely. Can there be trauma from me breaking my toe when I walk down the street? Yes. But there's going to be a lot of trauma if your parent dies from it.
Yeah.
Right. Or if there is like emotional, psychological, financial abuse going on and you're watching your parent crumble, even though you're, quote, not a broken family.
Sure.
Like,
sure.
just because it's separated doesn't mean that you can't still have healthy dynamics and functionality within that, like co-parenting relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Like, come on, guys, figure it out. Get a better hobby. I don't know what to tell you. But
yeah, bow out with grace, right? Be a good person. Learn to co-parent effectively for your children.
Sure.
Right? Or go to couples therapy and stop seeing your side person on the side like that. You're not going to make any decisions that way.
I know. I agree. But what do we know? Right? Or what do I know? You know more, but what do I know?
No, I tell my clients that all the time. I'm like, but what do I know? Y'all don't listen to me anyways.
Right.
All you parents out there who are like, my kids never listen to me. You should be really sad for therapists because not only do our kids not listen to us, but our clients don't listen to us either.
and they pay you to listen to you. Yeah,
they pay us to ignore our advice. Literally. Yeah, 100%.
Gosh dang. So could be worse. You could be a therapist.
It could be worse. You could be a therapist. Yeah. Like, I'll have kids that I do sessions with and they're like, it's so frustrating that I keep telling my friend to like, break up with this dude because he's so bad to her and she won't listen. And I just look at them and then they're like, is it? Yeah, they're like, oh, is that how you feel? And I was like, every day of my life. Literally every day of my life for the last, however many years.
Is it, Emma? Is that really hard for you?
Really?
Is it Jackson?
Oh, yeah. Olivia, tell me all about it.
Olivia.
But anyways,
Oh.
yeah, Chelsea and I are real frustrated from that one. Yeah, just figure it out. Figure your shit out. And you guys make sure to tune in for our interview to drop with Miss Lynda Friday. She is the sweetest, cutest. And we have actually a really great conversation about the process of her writing the book about her friend and like that experience and her own kind of personal theories of what happened to Pam. So it's kind of an inside scoop from the author. And again, if this episode sounded better than usual, then give a shout out to Miss Drews because she edited it for me.
And I think you guys will be pleasantly surprised at just her take on everything, because I know I was. Like,
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking that it was going to go one way, and by the end of it, I was like, wow, this lady's pretty bomb.
Yeah, for sure. All right, you guys, per usual, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy, twisted pretzel love triangle of a ride.
Yeah. Yep. You guys are the best.
All right, peace out, Girl Scouts.
Later, Gators. Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
The flip side.